Welcome, it's Jeremy Allen Gould. I'm coming to you today to confirm between God and of man that in fact the rumors that you have all heard are true. I started this podcast because I freaking love music. I was privileged enough to book amazing artists and bands in the past, and I was lucky enough to stay in touch with many of them to this day. This is a place to hear their stories. Thank you so much for riding along on this journey, and I hope you enjoy what you hear. With that said, the rumors are definitely true. Welcome back to this latest episode. Today I welcome the almighty Johnathon Ford. Johnathon, you know from the bands Roadside Monument, Pedro the Lion, Unwed Sailor, Mr. Bishop's Fist, Fellsway, and various other bands over the years. An amazing conversation with Johnathon regarding the Roadside records and his fondness for the Pedro the Lion record, It's Hard to Find a Friend, as well as his current records he's been putting out lately on Spartan Records. We delve into his past and kind of where he began, and it's just an awesome opportunity to talk to somebody I've looked up to since I was a teenager, and I know many of you have looked up to as well. So I hope you really enjoy this latest episode with Johnathon Ford. Johnathon Ford, buddy, what's up, man?
Not too much. Just talking to you and doing some laundry.
Nice. You still in Oklahoma?
Yeah, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
What do you got going on nowadays?
Pretty much my life consists of taking care of my cats and working on Unwed Sailor stuff. So that's what I've been doing. I currently working on a new Unwed Sailor album.
Oh, nice.
And getting ready for touring this spring. And of course, our new album, Mute the Charm, that whole release cycle that just came out a couple of weeks ago, February 9th, I think. So, just doing all that stuff with the reviews and social media posts and all that kind of thing. So yeah, awesome. It's just, I'm just swimming around in Unwed Sailor world.
Nice. Very, very cool, man. Well, I love the new record, by the way. It's fantastic. I really
thanks.
Stoked on it. Well, I know we'll talk about it in a little bit, but so I wanted to go back a little bit and kind of talk. You and I met quite a while ago. And I just was trying to think, I know I booked you guys with Appleseed Cast, one Unwedded with Appleseed in Wichita. And then I wound up booking you with your other side project, Native Lights, as well, which I loved that band as well. So
thanks.
And I just I've always looked up to you, and I think it's cool that you've just been in about every band that I've loved. so it's really cool to be able to know you and get to talk to you.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, I'm stoked. Man, we go way back, so it's nice to do a podcast with someone that I've been friends with for a few years now.
Yeah.
Few years.
Absolutely. Awesome. So, Jonathan, let's go back a little bit and kind of tell me what growing up was like for you, kind of the influences, the bands, the records that kind of stood out to you, and kind of what put you on this path to music in your life.
Well, but earliest start would be me as a little kid, 7 to 11, 12, something like that. Just listening to classical records at my house. My favorite thing to do was to read books and listen to records at the same time. So I would sit, we had one of those like 70s, like huge record player, furniture, 8-track player kind of thing, sitting in our living room. So I would just sit against that and read books and listen to classical records. And that was my favorite thing. So I think that's kind of what planted the seed for me musically. And even later into Unwed Sailor with the classical music influence. And that was my thing. And I loved music. In the car, I'd listen to classical music with my mom, and we would talk about the things that we saw in our minds as we were listening to the music, and make up like little stories as we listened to the music. So again, I think that's an influence that later came into Unwed Sailor. So I was into that, and then as I started getting older, you start listening to the radio more. You start realizing there's a world outside of classical music, which would be like pop radio for me.
Sure.
In the 80s. And that, that ended up being like my new obsession, recording the Casey Kasem show on cassette, every, whatever day that was, Saturday or whatever week that was.
Yeah.
Staying up all night to see a particular video on MTV, and that was the era of like, Journey and the Go-Go's and Styx, Foreigner, Bryan Adams.
Love him.
I just heard him today on the radio. It was awesome. So yeah, I mean that became my next obsession. Just loved it. Belinda Carlisle's solo records were huge for me. Men Without Hats was another one that I loved. The Def Leppard Hysteria record was huge.
Record. Amazing record.
Still huge for me.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, it was interesting growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, being in this, pretty, I mean, it is a city, but it's not super cultured, especially in the 80s. So my whole input was the radio. So, and then you start getting like metal, like glam metal on the radio, which kind of goes into Def Leppard a little bit. But so, I was getting into those bands, and those bands were kind of the only bands coming through Tulsa. So I would go see all those bands play, everyone from like Winger to, well, we did get Metallica.
Oh, nice.
Trickster, Nelson played.
I love all those bands.
Yeah, dude, After the Rain is a great song.
I know.
Yeah, it's great. So, I was listening to a lot of that and going to see those bands. And then I started getting into more like heavy stuff like Metallica or Megadeth came through, things like that. And around that same time, or actually before that, I started discovering punk rock, which was really hard to do here. It was not in your face. This would have been mid 80s. And I discovered punk rock through skateboarding, which was also hard to find here. And I pretty much discovered skateboarding and BMX through going to my local grocery store and just seeing a freestyling magazine or a Thrasher magazine. And, being a young kid and seeing that while your parents are doing grocery shopping, I was like, wow, what is that? So I, started picking up thrashers and freestyle magazines. And then one day down the street from me, I noticed that a bike shop opened. So my dad and I were driving by there one day, and I noticed there were some guys out there doing freestyle tricks on their bikes. So I got super excited. I was like, Dad, pull over. So I jumped out and I'm like watching them, and just my life is just changing right there. I'm just seeing like this thing that's like different, way different than football or way different than any sports, that I see on TV or at school. So I just became obsessed with freestyle and BMX and then skateboarding. And then, so from there, you start reading Thrasher, and you start seeing these skate rock compilations, with JFA and Drunk Engines and Black Flag. So my mind starts getting opened up to that whole world. And then, I didn't live in the country, but at that time, the area of Tulsa I lived in was not rural, but it was getting out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't get into like the city area much. But once I did, I started, I would see like some guy with bands on, and I'd be like, oh my God, that guy has bands. That's what I wear. That's what I see in Thrasher. So I'd go up and talk to him, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm into skateboarding too. So there we go. I met someone I can go skate with now in the city. And so then, we would go to his house, and he had like a launch trip in his house, and he'd be playing some band on his boombox. And I'd be like, who's this? And he's like, oh, it's Agent Orange. So he'd make me a cassette tape. So that's how I started getting into punk. And then from there, I'd go to the mall, and there'd be a Camelot Music.
Oh yeah.
Or a Music Land. So I'm just looking through these tapes, and I see a band called The Smiths, a band called New Order, a band called Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark, a band called Circle Jerks. So I'm just like buying these cassettes and discovering, the most insanely influential bands of all time.
Oh yeah.
Amazing. In those genres, by just like looking at the cover of a cassette. And then coming home and putting the Smiths on and listening to it over and over and over, and just not understanding Morrissey's voice. It's like it's reprogramming your brain.
Yeah.
It's like, because he's not, back then, it's like he wasn't necessarily this great vocalist. Like what in like the real world, what you consider this like amazing vocalist.
Yeah. So
I remember asking my mom if she thought his voice sounded good, because I didn't understand that, you don't have to be this trained vocalist to do what you do, and that's punk. It's punk rock. So I just got obsessed with the Smiths, the Sex Pistols, and so then, probably just about like every other kid who listened to that, that's like your door that opens into, oh, well, I could do a band too. So, that was pretty much right out of high school. I thought, okay, I want to play music. Like I've obsessively listened to music since I was a little kid. Even the things I do like skateboarding or BMX is wrapped up in music. So I want to do this. I want to play music. So I bought an acoustic guitar, and I would just sit in my room and try to learn how to play stuff, and I had a distortion pedal with my acoustic. So I would start doing feedback and things like that. So that sort of opened up my whole brain, to like, you can make noise and it sounds good. And, so from there, that started to bring me, from punk, I started getting into hardcore and heavier music. probably more heavier, like Helmet and Clutch, Crowbar, things like that. And that led me into the Mr. Bishop's Fist era.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was going to say real quick, it's funny you're saying all these records that kind of opened the door for you. Mr. Bishop's Fist was one of the first bands that opened the door for me. Like, getting the Demolition, the REX sampler, and then the Helpless Amongst Friends from Tooth and Nail. Like, I remember vividly my friends on when we got those comps, we were like, every band we would eat up. But I was drawn to Mr. Bishop's Fist because it was just so harsh, and it was like, I loved how dirty it was and all that stuff. So it's definitely can relate. That's kind of, for me, growing up in church and growing up in music, like kind of Christian music, like being able to open, a little bit wider, like, punk rock or aggressive music or heavy music. So to me, that was kind of a doorway for me. So that's really cool. Can you talk about Mr. Bishop's Fist for a little bit? Let's talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, well, I had met Tim Henderson, the drummer, he lived in Portland. And one night I was going to go to the show, and there was a local radio DJ here in town that was going to the show. And I had met him and talked with him, kind of gotten to know him. And he was like, "Hey, do you need a ride to the show?" And I'm like, "Sure." And he's like, "Hey, I'm bringing this guy I met named Tim Henderson. He's from Portland, and he just moved down here." And I was like, "Okay, cool." So he comes and picks me up. I meet Tim. We go to the show. Super cool night. Made a new friend. Said goodbye. And then probably 45 minutes later, I get a phone call, and it was from the radio DJ guy. And he said, he's like, "Hey man, we just got in a really bad car wreck. And Tim had to get taken to the hospital." He's like, "I'm okay, but I just wanted to let you know what happened." He's like, "I'm here dealing with the accident and everything, but the ambulance took Tim to the hospital." And I'm like, "Dude, this guy, Tim had just moved here, didn't know anybody, finally met some friends, and then he's like in a hospital in some strange city, all the way across the country." So I thought, dude, I'm gonna go up to the hospital, see Tim, and make sure he's okay. So my mom took me up there to see Tim, and he was okay. He was just shooken up and got rattled around, and they just wanted to make sure he was really okay. So after that, Tim and I exchanged phone numbers, and it's like, "Well, hey man, let's hang out when you get better." So then we ended up starting to hang out a lot, and we were really kindred spirits. I mean, we were both really into music. He was super into the band The Sundays.
I love
so
him.
Was I. He was a big Enya fan.
I love Enya too.
Yeah, like he was really into Ligeti, this classical composer, who I had never heard before. And so he was like showing me all this new music. And the Innocence Mission.
I love that.
He introduced me to them. So we were just like loving it, hanging out, and I was showing him all these new bands that I listened to. And so he was also really into Helmet and Clutch. So we were like on this mission. I went to Portland with him to visit his parents, and we were going to all these, and this was like, I think this was the day Siamese Dream was released.
Wow.
Because we were going to all these record stores, and every store was playing Siamese Dream. And we love that too. And I know we went into some store, and the record store employee recommended Tool to us. so we picked that up. So we were just discovering music together. And so, at that point it's like, okay, well, the logical step is we should start a band. I mean, and he's like, Tim was like, I played drums before a little bit, so I could play drums. And we had a friend at the time named Mike Jameson who played guitar. And I was like, well, I've messed around on the bass, but I can kind of play bass. So we just started a band, and we would go to this IHOP restaurant every night, well, almost every night, and eat. And we would just talk about names, what we would call it, and song titles. And then one day we just came up with Mr. Bishop's Fist. And so like, okay, let's do it. So we just went in my garage and started writing songs that influenced by bands like Helmet and Clutch and that whole thing. And I think, as far as like lyrically and stuff at that time, I had gone to a Christian school my whole life and was just pretty fed up with it at that point. Just the rules, just getting thrown around in that world. So I was pissed, as a late teen, about it. So that's what I wrote my lyrics about, was that religious system that I just had grown to hate, and had this hold on me, and it would take years to shake it off.
No.
So I just had that anger and hate in me with that. And then, so we wrote these songs, went in the studio, and at that point I had written the lyrics, and actually Tim wrote some lyrics too. And we didn't know who was going to sing for the band as we were recording the demo. And so Tim and I were like, well, let's just both try it, and whoever sounds the best will do it. So Tim got up and blew out his voice in like 20 seconds. And I got up, and what you hear on that demo is what came out of my mouth.
That's amazing.
Like, that's the first time I had ever sang or screamed like that. And I really think it was all those years from 1st through 12th grade of being in that Christian school that just came out.
I bet.
And it just worked.
Were you guys stoked on it? Were you like, this is amazing? Or were you like, did it exceed what you thought it was going to be when you recorded it?
Yeah, man. I mean, I think every kid that records their first demo is stoked, like I, for me, it was like, man, hearing my voice for the first time and it working. My bass playing is like pretty horrible, but a lot of like early hardcore bands, the bass playing is horrible. So, so yeah, we loved it. I mean, it's what we wanted.
Yeah.
We felt like it. We honestly didn't know what we were doing. I mean, obviously, if we were going in and we didn't even know who was going to sing, but I felt like it was very pure.
Yeah.
Like it was straight from our heart and our brains. Like it was very immature and innocent. And I think that's why people connected to it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of hardcore at that time was very like, we sound like West Coast hardcore, or we sound like, we sound like Revelation Band, or we sound like, East Coast hardcore. It was just chuggy, like you knew what was coming next.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it was, just different in that scene at the time. And I forgot to mention, along with the helmet and clutch and stuff, we were really big into Quicksand Slip.
I love that record.
Albums like that were completely redefining that whole genre.
Yep.
So that was a big influence, for us. And so we were doing Mr. Bishop's Fist, and then we met this guy Ricky Rogers.
He's from Warlord, right?
Warlord Ricky. Yeah. And that opened up a whole new world for Tim and I, because he just walked in and was like, "Hey, have you ever heard Bark Market before? Hey, have you ever heard Today Is the Day before? Hey, have you ever heard Neurosis?"
Wow.
Like throwing all that stuff in our lives. So that was like, once we started getting into all that, we were like, okay, Mr. Bishop's Fist just sounds prehistoric to us now. After listening to Today Is the Day, Willpower, and Bark Market, Gimmick, I was like, okay, this is like a whole other world.
Yep.
So we were hanging out with Ricky a lot, and we decided we would not do Mr. Bishop's Fist anymore and start a band with Ricky and his friend Nathan. And that turned into a band called Katechumen.
Oh yeah.
And so we recorded like garage demos of that. We never played a show. Oh no, wait, we played one show at Cornerstone on the skate ramp.
Nice.
And that band is the next step, is what led me to move to the West Coast.
I gotcha.
So pretty much at that point, being like 20 or whatever, Tulsa had nothing for me. There was no music scene here. I didn't see myself anyone appreciating Katechumen, or let alone being able to play really any shows here. So I thought, well, the place to go would be, we all wanted to go to Portland. And, this was grunge era too, a little past grunge era. So the, Pacific Northwest was just vibrant at that time. So we all headed up there to Portland, and but Katechumen didn't end up working out because the singer ended up getting put in jail.
Oh God.
So he couldn't move out with us. So at that point, I'm in Portland and I don't have a band anymore. So I'm just, loving Portland, loving all these like amazing record stores and living in that environment.
Yeah.
But I wanted to play music. So I had met Andrew Rysick, who played guitar in the band Focused,
yeah.
And I got in touch with him. And what's funny is, remembering all this, like there were no cell phones, so I cannot remember how I contacted these people. Like, how did I get a hold of Andrew in Long Beach when I was in Portland?
Random.
I don't know if I wrote a letter to him or what, but like, but anyway, I got a hold of Andrew and I said, hey, I'm living up in Portland, but I can't really find what to do here. Can I come down there? So I went to Long Beach and hung out with Andrew and lived at his house. And so yeah, we would just hang out, and I just got into that whole scene there, like the Long Beach hardcore scene. And I even got to like jam with some guys there, like me and Andrew and some other guys kind of started to play music a little bit, but for one time, I think at someone's house, and it was great. I've always loved Andrew, and he's always been such an influential guy to me musically. He would send me mixtapes and introduce me to so many new bands. But again, it just didn't feel right there. Yeah. Like I couldn't really find it. So I went back to Portland, and then I had met Matt Johnson at that time from the band Blenderhead.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't know if I wrote Matt a letter or what I did, but I asked if I could come up to Seattle. And Matt was like, sure, man, come up. We all live in a house together. It was called the House of Funk.
Yeah.
He's like, you can just sleep on the couch and, you know, it'll be great. So I got up to Seattle, and that's when everything clicked.
Yeah.
And everything started. I just started meeting everybody, all these musicians. That the scene was just insanely vibrant.
Yeah.
And so I was living there, and then I heard about this band Roadside Monument that was recording their first album up at Avast, which is a studio in Seattle. And I'm like, cool, yeah, I want to go check them out, because, you know, all those dudes were friends with all the House of Funk guys, you know, Damian Jurado and Dave Bazan and Matt Johnson and everybody. It was like, and the House of Funk was kind of ground zero for everybody.
Yeah.
It's where everybody would like Coolidge, which was Damian Jurado and
so good.
David Bazan's band, and Eben Haas from Blenderhead. They would practice there at House of Funk. So I would wake up on the couch to them practicing.
So cool.
So yeah, it was just so vibrant. So I went down to Avast and just introduced myself to Roadside Monument, which is where I met Doug Lorig.
Yeah.
From Roadside. And, you know, they were tracking, and I went in and sat down on the couch with him. I'd never even met him before, and just made myself at home pretty much. And I remember I was talking to them, and I believe it was Doug said something to me like, hey, like our bass player is quitting. Would you be into playing bass for us? I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And I hadn't really played bass. Like I had a little bit in Mr. Bishop's Fist, but it was very like primitive. So around that time, I decided I started a band called Fellsway with Josh Golden, who would end up becoming a bass player in Pedro the Lion.
Okay.
Matt Johnson from Roadside Monument on drums, Eben Haas from Coolidge and Blenderhead on guitar, and me on bass, and me singing. And so we wrote some songs that were very, to me, they were a cross between like Still Life, Drive Like Jehu.
Yeah.
Like they were just this noisy kind of emo. The band Current.
Yeah.
They were a big influence on me. So we wrote a few songs, went in and recorded a demo, and it ended up sounding great. And so we played 3 shows. And the last show we played was at the House of Funk, and it was Roadside Monument's last show with their bass player, Fellsway, and Jeremy Enoch solo.
Oh my God.
And there might have been one other band, I can't remember. But this is like happening in the living room of the house I'm living in.
What were you thinking? Like Jeremy Enoch he wasn't big then, obviously, but what were you like? Oh my God, this whole thing's insane.
Yeah, I mean, it was everything that I had wanted and I was looking for, and more. And you know, the house was packed full of people seeing the show. The Fellsway show, I ended up swinging my bass around and hitting Josh Golden in the head. And he had blood running down his face on our last song. They had to take him to the hospital to get stitches.
Oh my gosh.
So it was wild, dude. It was a wild show. And so then that's how I got into Roadside Monument.
So why didn't Fellsway continue? Didn't you guys put a song out on like a Tooth and Nail comp or?
Yeah, I'm Your Biggest Fan.
Yeah, that's right.
Volume 1 or something. Yeah. Well, I think because I had gotten into Roadside,
And
I was playing bass for them, and they were a signed band.
Yeah.
And there was the goal of touring.
Yeah.
And you had Doug as like a main songwriter in there too. I at that time in my life, I wasn't really a songwriter.
Yeah.
That at least I didn't think I was. I hadn't tapped that potential. So I just dove into Roadside, and we were writing as a 4-piece at that point. Mike Dente was still in the band. And so we started playing shows, and we were mostly playing Beside This Brief Hexagonal and My Life is Green 7-inch. But we had written a couple new songs that ended up on the Polar Roadside Monument split.
Yeah.
And so we had started playing, and Mike Dente and I didn't really get along that well. And I think it was just for mostly me, probably, because at that time in my life, like, I was so driven and so focused. I didn't want anything to hold me back from living this dream of being in a band that toured and recorded. And Mike was in a position during that time where he couldn't really tour that much, and I think he was even kind of more wanted to go a different musical direction too.
I gotcha.
And so and that all came to a head when we had done a show at the Hiawatha House. We were doing a show at the Hiawatha House, which is a communal house we all lived in the U District in Seattle. And we held shows in our basement. It was great. We had Mineral played.
Wow.
Kerosene 454. Soul Junk, Murder City Devils played our living room.
Crazy.
It was great. But anyway, so we're playing, and we had made a set list, and Mike wanted to play a couple of his songs, and so we had included them in the set list, but we had to cut our set short, and we couldn't play Mike's songs. So keep in mind, Sub Pop had come out to see us at this show too.
Wow.
In our basement. And we knew that. So we were a little nervous. And so at the end of the set, we finished and we had to cut Mike's songs. And he got really pissed and started just freaking out while we were playing, swinging his guitar around, like threw his guitar across the basement, and just stormed out.
Wow.
And that was the end of the show. So we never heard from Sub Pop after that.
Oh gosh.
But Mike quit. So that's how we became the me, Doug, and Matt 3-piece.
Yeah.
And from there, that's when we started writing 8 Hours Away from Being a Man.
Let's talk about that record.
Going that whole world.
Yeah, let's talk about that record. Tell me when you were writing it, was it something, I guess it's kind of the question I asked. Look, what were you feeling when you were writing? Were you like, this is insane, this is amazing? Were you just like, or are you just putting it down on what you were feeling?
It was putting down what we were feeling. Again, we didn't really know exactly what we were doing. Like when I wrote the bass, the Sperm-Ridden Burden, if you really listen to that opening bass chord of that song, it makes no sense at all. It's not even musical. Play that on a bass without distortion, and it sounds like a guy in Guitar Center picking up a bass for the first time and hitting strings. It makes no sense. So me as a songwriter at that point, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just kind of went with my heart and my gut and went with this inspiration and drive of being a songwriter and being in a band.
Yeah.
And that's what you hear on that record. And just being extremely lucky that I found Matt Johnson and Doug Lorig, because we had this chemistry together.
Absolutely.
That some people never find. And I just found in my first real band that I went on tour with and went into a real recording studio with. So we just had a chemistry and a magic together. And once we started writing songs, it just, we were just writing away in our basement. And then, we got booked at Robert Lang Studios in Seattle with Bob Weston, from Shellac and Volcano Sons, and who was just a hero of ours. And even then, I'm just pinching myself. I'm just like, okay, this is all really working out. And, even Robert Lang, it was just a legendary studio.
Yeah.
It's like Nirvana, Foo Fighters.
Nuts.
And so we recorded 8 hours away from being a man, and literally what felt like 8 hours. We were not in the studio long. I would have to check with Doug, but I feel like we might have recorded and mixed that thing in like 3 days or something. It was not very long.
Yeah.
And we tracked live, so yeah, I mean, that was my first experience of being in a real studio and recording a record, with Bob Weston. It was just insane.
That's awesome. When you heard the record, when it was done, what did you think?
Again, I loved it and I was proud of it. And again, it was another situation where we knew it was something really different. Like, it didn't sound like anything else that was going on at that time. And I think that, a lot of that was our influences, like our together. Like, Matt was super into, like Neil Peart or Rush. Mm-hmm. And then Doug loved Led Zeppelin. And we all loved Slint. Yeah. I was really into this Southern California emo band called Evergreen. Mm-hmm. Drive Like Jehu. So we had all these, it's like our influences weren't all in the emo world. Like we loved other things.
Sure.
So I think all that got thrown in the pot and stirred up. That was 8 hours. And it's interesting to me looking back and just seeing how minimal that record is. And that wasn't like planned. Like, we didn't think, oh, we're going to make this minimal and dark and mysterious. It just happened. So I think that's, a lifelong lesson, musical lesson for me has been to just let go. Yeah. And allow. And that's what we did on that record. We just let go and allowed whatever to channel through us to make this record. And just to be ourselves, not try to be anybody else in the music that we were creating.
Yeah. What did the label think when you gave it to them?
I don't really know. I would think if Brandon didn't like it, he probably wouldn't tell us. Just because that would have been like a big, wet towel over our, drive to do anything. I mean, I'm sure he probably thought, okay, this is definitely not commercial. It's definitely not, a pop punk band. Yeah. It's definitely not Beside This Brief Hexagonal. It's not My Life Is Green 7-inch. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely in a whole other genre, very underground emo genre. And, as far as I know, that record did horribly at the time. I think the Tooth and Nail crowd just did not really get it. Yeah. And for us, like we did some regional touring, playing shows. We would play shows at the Velvet Elvis in Seattle.
Yeah.
which was the awesome all ages show or club. Lungfish would play there. This amazing local Seattle band called Bare Minimum played there. I think Sunny Day Real Estate might have played there. But it was amazing underground venue for all those kind of bands. So we would play there. And then in Portland, we would, play some punk clubs down there. And we did a couple tours by ourselves. And then we did a tour. Our first kind of national tour was with Stavesacre. And a lot of those shows were churches.
Wow.
And so we would go in there and it would just be like, what are we doing here? Like, it just made no sense because the crowd did not get at all what we were doing. We didn't want to be playing those places. We had just recorded a record with Bob Weston.
Yeah.
Like, we want to be playing the Fireside Bowl in Chicago, Yep. But we loved Stavesacre.
Great guys.
That was a great opportunity touring with them, and we made great friendships that we still have to this day with Stavesacre.
It's great.
So love those guys to death. And their show at Furnace Fest a couple years ago was so good. Like, after it was over, I was so sad because I thought this band still needs to be playing.
Oh yeah.
Like, they were so good. It just brought back so many memories watching them play. And I think out of the entire festival, that was like the show where I thought, I missed them after that last note they hit.
That's awesome.
I was like, I just want them to keep playing.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so after that tour, we decided, okay, we don't want to play churches. So we just started booking our own tours, which was a whole other thing that we had no idea what we were doing. And so Doug would just start researching clubs throughout the country and mail our CD to them, and then asking if we could play. And then he would go to the Tooth and Nail offices and go in the back room and use their long distance to book all our tours. So Tooth and Nail was getting charged the long distance bill. But what was wild about it is we would try to book these shows and the clubs would ask see, in the 90s, like in that whole scene, it was whatever like label you were on was a huge deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
That it was like your label was really important. So we would say Tooth and Nail and they wouldn't give us the show.
Wow.
Because of the Christian thing. And that for us, being on Tooth and Nail Brandon was our friend. He offered to put out our records and he would put us in the studio with Bob Weston. So yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah.
So we got the Christian identity thrown on us.
Of course.
So it was really hard for us to book tours. So at that time, Tooth and Nail was distributed through Caroline Records, which was a well-respected distribution and record label at that time. So Doug would start telling the clubs that we were on Caroline Records, and we would get the shows. So we just started touring, going out, all the way to New York, Boston, Chicago, Athens, Georgia. And still no one was at our shows. I mean, it was brutal.
I bet it was.
At that time, if you're looking at the mid 90s, so to get a cheap van, you were looking at buying something from the 70s.
Yeah.
So we were touring in like 1970s vans at that time with an 8-track player. And like we broke down constantly. And talk about memories. Just our van, at one point our van almost blowing up on the side of the highway, sleeping in truck stops, trying to get our van fixed. just our radiator just blowing up in the middle of the desert, like shooting shit all over our windshield.
That's nuts.
While we're listening to Scene, on the stereo, yeah, but again, that was like, at that time, on those tours, I would bring Henry Rollins' Get in the Van with me.
Oh, nice.
That was my Bible. Like, that was like, okay, this is what I'm basing my touring attitude and experience on. Like, I'm going to work my ass off. I'm going to take every punch and get back up and keep going. And I think to this day, I still carry that with me in my music career or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Is that attitude. So we were just living the DIY punk band in the van life. And it was beautiful.
That's awesome.
It was scary, it was sad, it was lonely. But I would never change anything.
Yeah, you were getting to do what you wanted to do,
Oh, the freedom I felt is, something that those early tours and feeling that freedom is something that's like, I haven't been able to tap that since.
Wow.
That. What a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Realizing your dream, even though you're sleeping in a truck stop and your van just blew up. Reading Get in the Van, like next to a trucker. It's just like, it's beautiful.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's very cool. So how long after that did you start to write I Am the Day of Current Taste? Like what, you obviously toured that time, so that was probably a year or so, but when did you start, writing that record, and kind of talk about that record a little bit?
Well, it seems like it was after the touring. You kind of, as a band, you start thinking, okay, we've been out on tour. Now we write a new record. So yeah, we just started writing Current Taste, and at that point we had this whole other slew of influences that we were mixing in. Like Don Caballero was huge for us at that time. Chavez was another big one.
Yeah.
So it's like we got even more mathy and more distorted. And I think another thing too, the reason the music got more unhinged, I think probably came from us going through all those experiences of feeling like no one gave a shit about us.
Yeah.
So it's just there. I think there's some anger in I Am the Day of Current Taste. And I also think there was an aspect of it too, that feeling so like we're alone and on our own, that we kind of like almost didn't give a shit too.
Yeah. Which
is how you get those song titles like Cops Are My Best Customers. Car versus semi wins every time. Like there was kind of a humor in it too. Like we had to laugh at it. Like just, you had to laugh on seeing your van almost blow up in the snowstorm, and sleeping in the truck stop. So yeah, we went back into Robert Lang to record I Am the Day of Current Taste. This time with Jay Robbins from Jawbox.
Love Jay Robbins.
And so Matt was super stoked on that because he's a huge Jawbox fan. And we all were, but Matt was giddy about it. And there was the difference between 8 Hours and I Am the Day was I Am the Day, we actually had some pre-production stuff. Like Jay flew out to Seattle and came out to our rehearsals and sat there with a notepad and listened to our songs as we played them, which I was like, wow, like he's like a producer, it was like,
like a real producer.
the next big thing, man, So when we went in the studio with Jay, he got really involved in Doug's vocals. Like he would make Doug do stretches before he sang. he would suggest vocal harmonies. So he was really focused on Doug's vocals. And yeah, it was cool to have someone we respected so much in there really contributing to the sound in the band.
Absolutely.
While with Bob Weston, he kind of had the Steve Albini approach of hands off.
Mm-hmm.
And a funny story about Bob is obviously he knew how much we looked up to him while we were in there. And so there was one, I had tracked something, a part or a bass part or something. And I remember Bob was at the board, and I'm looking kind of at the back of his head, standing behind him. And I said, Bob, what do you think of that? And it just got quiet, and he never even turned around and looked at me. I just hear this: "You didn't hire a fucking cheerleader." And me, Matt, and Doug were like, "Oh my God!" But Bob was like smiling.
That's hysterical.
Because yeah, man, he was just playing on the fact that we were so like stoked
all about it
and nervous. But the great thing about Bob too is like we would play in Chicago. We would show up we played the Lounge Acts, and Bob would let us stay with him at his house.
It's awesome.
So there was never anything malicious, or he wasn't being an asshole. Mm-hmm. He was just being funny and
That's
sarcastic.
Awesome. Was he and JFord? How do you think they felt about the band? Like, were they both stoked on it, or?
I mean, I feel like for Bob, he probably, again, we didn't hire a fucking cheerleader.
Yeah.
So he wasn't giving us a lot of he wasn't cheerleading, saying, "Oh, you guys sound awesome," or "That part is great," or whatever. So I think he was just there to do his job. But he did play trumpet on the record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On Iowa Backroads. And I remember there was one comment he made. I can't remember what song it was, but he said something like that. He said, "Oh, that's your Rodan song." The band Rodan.
Yeah. He
compared us to Rodan.
Wow.
But that's really all the feedback we got from Bob. But Jay was like, more in the trenches. Yeah. With us. But yeah, he seemed to be stoked and enjoying himself, as he was recording the record.
That's awesome.
But I think too, with I Am the Day of Current Taste, once we had that recorded and Brandon heard it, I remember he heard the song I Am the Day of Current Taste, and it kicks in and it kind of has this this verse, and then it goes into a chorus. Yeah. It kind of has this normal song structure. And I remember Brandon, his eyes getting big, whoa, Roadside, they wrote a pop song. And then it just goes into a 6-minute, math rock thing. And another funny story about I Am the Day is there was some kid that was in Seattle visiting, and somehow he got a hold of us and asked if he could come to the studio while we were recording. And, we were like, sure, come on up. So he came up there, and I remember we played some of I Am the Day of Current Taste for him as we were recording it. And he just kind of didn't like it.
Oh, wow.
Because it was so different than 8 Hours Away. And we started running into that. Tim Owen from Jade Tree was interested in signing Roadside Monument to Jade Tree. Wow. And he heard I Am the Day of Current Taste and decided not to.
Interesting.
Because he wanted another 8 Hours Away from Being a Man. So again, we did it. We put out this record that was on our end, straight from the heart, pure, exactly who we are, that didn't sound like anybody else.
Yeah.
But nobody really got it.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing about Roadside is up towards the end there, I remember we started getting people coming out to our shows. Like I remember we played in Columbus, Ohio, and we had a packed out show.
Wow.
At this club in Columbus, and we were like, what is going on? Like, so it seemed like maybe people were starting to get it a little bit and follow us. And that was right around the time that we broke up.
I got you. Was it just you all kind of were like, were you burnt out? Was it just, we don't have to get too far into it, but was it just kind of like it's run its course?
For me, it was, I was friends with Dave Bazan, and I was hearing his new band, Pedro the Lion.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like my favorite band up there. Like I loved Pedro the Lion so much. And then I got asked to play bass in Pedro the Lion. So I had to make a choice at that time what I wanted to do. And so I chose Pedro the Lion.
Okay. And that was when he was recording It's Hard to Find a Friend?
It was right before It's Hard to Find a Friend. I believe he was writing it, and then he had asked me to play bass on it. So it was that, and that was just Dave and I at his house.
Wow.
He had a studio in his house. And at that time, he was literally sleeping in his closet under it, and he had like that was back when he wore white shirts all the time.
Yeah.
And he just had a clothes hanger full of white shirts, like hanging up in a closet, and he just slept under those shirts in the closet. And then we literally tracked the record like in his room.
What was that like recording that record? That's a phenomenal record.
It was way different because it was the first time I'd ever experienced like recording at home.
Mm-hmm.
But keep in mind, this is before Pro Tools and recording on a computer. This was all we were recording on tape with a mixing board in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very much like a work day. And I think that's what Dave wanted it to be like.
Yeah.
Back then, I felt like he wanted Pedro the Lion. He wanted Pedro the Lion to be his job. So me being in the band, it was going to be my job. So I would wake up on whatever days we were going to be recording at his house. I would wake up, get my bass, go to the bus stop, get on the bus, take the bus out to Dave's house. And this would be like 7 a.m. Like he wanted to start in the morning. So I'd get there and we'd go get, some hot chocolate and coffee and then just start recording.
Wow.
And it was very, very intimate. It was just me and Dave in his house. And I think we were both still learning. At that point, as far as I know, Dave had never recorded a record before himself. Mm-hmm. Like tracking a record as an engineer.
Yeah.
So, and he was doing that because it was just him and I in the house doing it. And it was just super peaceful, man.
That's cool.
Just imagine getting up every morning, taking the bus to this house. It's just you and Dave, and you're just sitting in there recording these songs on a tape machine. Like it's very much how the record sounds.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
That's what it felt like. And if you look at the artwork of that room with the drum set,
mm-hmm.
That is the original cover, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. Yeah. That's the room that we tracked in.
Wow.
Yeah, man, it was beautiful. It was a whole world away from Roadside.
Yeah.
Which was, Current Taste was just cops are my best customers, like this crazy distortion, math rock, throwing my bass into the amp, screaming, you know, like to this minimal, peaceful home record.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely. What'd you think of when that record was finished? I mean, that's a phenomenal record. Like I said, it's just, how did you? I mean, it's cool because like you're saying, you went from Roadside, this chaotic, you know, bangers and heaviness, and then it's just this beautiful. I wouldn't say peaceful record, but in comparison, it's definitely a lot more of a peaceful record. But what was your thoughts on that record?
I loved it. I was already a huge Dave Bazan fan. I thought, and still think, he's one of the best songwriters of our generation.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's incredible. And to be able to sit there with him and see him create and record those songs was just, I mean, it's like going to school, you know, it's like you're learning, watching this guy do his beautiful, unique thing. So yeah, I mean, I heard it and I was just stoked, man. I was like, dude, I'm on a Pedro the Lion record. Yeah. Like these songs, I mean, I played bass on that record, and then I would, even after playing bass, I would sit and hear that record and cry. Oh. Like just from Dave's songs, you know, because he's incredible. So it was an incredible experience that I'm so thankful for. I bet. Just, wow. I mean, talk about being at the right place at the right time, you know? Yeah. Did you tour? How long were you in Pedro, and did you tour with it, or how did that go? Yeah, I did I believe it was the first tour Dave ever did in Pedro, and we toured in a Datsun hatchback. Wow. And it was a 3-piece, bass, guitar, drums, all the equipment in the Datsun hatchback. And we toured down the West Coast. And the car, it was a stick, the car was a stick. Yeah. I forgot the term for that. Manual transmission. Yeah. So sometimes the car wouldn't start. So we'd have to push the car and pop the clutch to start the car. Huh. So we'd be at a club and it'd be the end of the night. You know, there'd be people outside. We'd load everything up. I can see this happening. I'm just imagining it. Yeah, dude, the car wouldn't start. So me and the drummer had to get out, push the car while Dave's popping the clutch, and then we'd have to run and jump in. Just there we go. You know. But man, that tour was and is one of my most favorite tours I ever did. That's awesome. Because again, it felt like that record. Like it was minimal. Even in the vehicle we were in, it was minimal. You know, it's like we have like the fact that we have a stick shift, the fact that we have to like push our car to start it. Everything was so minimal and innocent. Yeah. And it was in California, going down the West Coast. It was in the springtime, so it's starting to get warmer. I remember that Bedhead was on tour at that time. Wow. And we were following them. Like they would play the same place we did the night before. And Dave and I were huge Bedhead fans. Yeah. And we would just talk about it in the car, like, oh my God, we want to see Bedhead so bad. And that was when the Tortoise TNT album came out. Mm-hmm. So we were listening to that a lot in the car. I remember that. I remember we listened to Sinead O'Connor, I Do Not Have What I Haven't Got, a lot in the car. It was just like this road trip with a buddy and just playing It's Hard to Find a Friend songs every night. I can't imagine. Yeah. To not a lot of people. Yeah, I was going to say. Pedro had not been discovered at that point. So mm-hmm. It was, we weren't playing these packed rooms. Was it you guys just by yourselves, or were you with another band? Or we were with a band called Mars Accelerator.
Okay.
They were a Seattle band at that time. Really, I would say kind of built a spill-ish.
Mm.
And they were great, super cool. So yeah, man, it was, I remember we stopped on some coastal town where Dave had lived at one time and met with his parents. They ate lunch with his parents, and it was just so laid back and peaceful. And
That's awesome.
yeah, again, one of my most favorite tours I've ever done.
Yeah, I can tell in the way you're talking about it. It's, I can tell you cherish it, and that's really a cool opportunity for you, and it's a really monumental record for Dave and yourself. It's just a phenomenal record, through and through. I'm actually stoked out. He's coming in a couple months he's doing that record in Control, I believe, front to back.
Yeah, so, dude, that's so rad.
Yeah, I'm stoked.
I love his band right now.
Yeah, I saw him at Furnace Fest last year. Because we hung out, and I remember he played. They were phenomenal.
And I believe that. Well, maybe that's not the same band on his current record.
Oh, is it?
I'm not sure. I know it's the same guitar player. Not sure about the drummer. But I love this direction of Pedro the Lion right now. Like that last record is so minimal.
Yeah.
And it's even more personal and introspective on Dave's part. It's like you're sitting down and it's like you're sitting down having a conversation with him about his childhood.
Love that.
Like it's incredible. It's one of my favorite Pedro the Lion records.
It's great. It's phenomenal. He's prolific for sure.
Oh, dude, he's, like I said, he's one of the greats of our generation.
Absolutely. Sweet. So I don't want to rush through it, but I do want to get on. I know you have an extensive Unwed Sailor catalog, and so I kind of wanted to hit on the latest two records, Truth and Consequences, and Mute the Charm, like you said, just came out recently. So maybe kind of give me your thoughts on those records, and then we can talk about what's coming up for Unwed as well. And so we'll go from there.
Okay. Truth or Consequences. That was an interesting record. It was recorded. They're all coming out so fast lately that Unwed Sailor's been a roller coaster ride since 2019, because I've been putting out a record every year.
Yeah, it seems like it.
So sometimes they get jumbled up in my mind, and I can't remember where I recorded one and where I mixed one. but Truth or Consequences came from songs that Matt Putman, who is the studio drummer for Unwed Sailor, that we had recorded at his house. And then I had also worked on Truth or Consequences in Bloomington, Indiana, with Mike Adams.
Okay.
Mike Adams at His Honest Way.
Yeah, he's great.
I had worked on it with him, and I believe I also worked on it in Birmingham, Alabama, at the Comvest studio. And it's these past few years with Unwed Sailor, especially with Look Alive, Truth or Consequences, and Mute the Charm, I feel like Unwed Sailor is just creating these new worlds that it's living in. Like with Truth or Consequences, I really started going for tracking multiple bases on top of each other. And I did that a little bit on Look Alive too. But with Truth, is when I really figured out I could do it. And I really liked how it sounded. And it was making a lot of sense for me. So I feel like that's a record where I discovered a new element of Unwed Sailor that I feel like was always going to be there now.
Yeah.
And another first on that record is the song Voodoo Roo, which I wrote about one of my cats. And that's the first Unwed Sailor song that I played every instrument on.
Wow.
Which was something I always wanted to do, but I didn't know if I could do it. So I just went for it, and it works.
It's amazing.
And what I love about it too is that it actually sounds like Voodoo Roo, my cat, because she's a beautiful tortoiseshell cat, but she's kind of clumsy. Like if she ever falls, she can't fall on her feet. Like every other cat in the world does.
Yeah.
Like she'll land on her side. And I love the way that song kind of wobbles around in a way.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I played every instrument.
That's pretty cool.
And it gives it this kind of like archaic, primitive wobble feel. So that's kind of a highlight of that record to me. I really love Blitz. I feel like that's the closest Unwed Sailor has ever come to like a Cure song.
Wow. Well, yeah, I can. Jared Bowser and I were like, this totally sounds like The Cure. Like we said the same thing when that record came out. We're like, he's totally listening to The Cure.
Well, see, I wasn't though. That's the thing. It's like all these songs that happen. I don't sit down and think The Cure.
Yeah.
I don't think those things, because the second that happens, it's not going to work. So you literally just channel all those influences throughout your life that you've heard, and you let go, and you just let those things, let them come through how they want.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love Truth, man. I love the album cover.
Absolutely.
I feel like that really brought the record together.
Yeah, and you get to work with Spartan too, John at Spartan. He's incredible.
Yes, that's another highlight of Truth or Consequences. Was the first record that came out on Spartan Records, who I've been working with. It feels like for years.
Yeah, it does.
But it's only been like maybe 2. It's really wild, like how that is. Like, because John and I, we've just become really close. As friends too. So yeah, that's my first record was Spartan Records. And I'm trying to remember the other songs on Truth or Consequences. Palladora. I really like that song. That Mike Adams plays guitar on that song.
Oh, okay.
And piano as well. And that was another song where I was diving into the multi-bass tracks. But yeah, and again, making a record with Matt Putman and Dave Swatzel, who plays guitar and Unwed Sailor, like we have a chemistry as well. Like I said, back with me, Doug, and Matt had a chemistry. For Unwed Sailor, Dave, Matt, and I have a chemistry that just works really well as far as putting these songs together.
Dave's in Birmingham, right?
Yep, he lives in Birmingham.
Okay, yeah, I met him through Jake Brown.
Oh yeah, Jake's a great friend of ours.
Yeah, Jake's great. That's awesome. So let's talk about Mute the Charm for a little bit, since that one just came out. I know we talked earlier, you're on to the next already, but kind of tell me your thoughts on that record a little bit, and kind of what inspired that record.
Well, Mute the Charm was actually written really quickly, which is interesting. Usually with Unwed Sailor records, like I'm always writing and recording, and as I'm writing a record or getting the vision of a record, I'll be like, oh yeah, like we started on this song 2 years ago. This should go on that record. So I'll kind of like pick things like that. But for Mute the Charm, it was all written at once and really quickly. And it felt more raw too. And so we got those songs together and went in to record them, but I didn't Mute the Charm was actually even though it was written quickly, it was a hard record to record because I kept running into problems sonically that I didn't like. Like we had to retrack the drums. We had to do a couple different mixes. I think it was mastered like maybe 10 times or something. Wow. Poor Chris Colbert. I put him through the ringer on that record. But I love how it turned out.
Yeah, sounds fantastic.
And it feels like more of a Unwed Sailor rock record.
Yeah.
Like it's guitar heavy. And it also throws back a little bit, I think, to like the Faithful Anchor sometimes.
Yeah, I can hear that.
Like on the song Let Me Be Away. That feels like it could have been a song on the Faithful Anchor.
Yeah.
But also, you know, there's some really odd ones jumped in on that record, like Western Dime. When I wrote that bass line, I remember thinking, I don't know, dude, might be kind of dumb. And I made a rule for myself. Anytime I think that something I write is dumb, you need to hold on to it for dear life and keep going with it.
Yeah.
Because it's something it's instinctual. Like you're not trying. You just sat down and played this dumb little riff. And that's what I did with Western Dime. And then all of a sudden you have like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath meets Unwed Sailor.
Yeah.
Like this heavy, like grooving John Bonham song.
Right.
So, and then like the song Sugar Sand, I remember I sat down and I wrote that bass line, you know, the da 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 da. And I remember thinking, first thing that popped in my mind was like Van Halen, Jump, Panama.
Love that.
Like I wanted that. I thought I want to write like an anthem, like where the crowd is like chanting, shaking their fists, you know, like da 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 da. You know, that was what I felt like Sugar Sand was. Then you have a song like London Fog, which to me, like when I wrote that bass line, I was like, okay, this is like the Sundays, blatant Sundays to me. And so that just formed into what when I grew up listening to the Sundays, and I had an obsession with London and Manchester growing up, because most of the bands I was listening to came from there. That area.
Totally.
So I always had this vision of like foggy, rainy London.
Yeah.
And so I feel like London Fog, I wanted to create this foggy, rainy song that reminded me of the Sundays in the 80s.
So cool. That's so cool.
And then you have May We, which is the whole like Manchester scene of Manchester in the early 90s snuck into that one. I kind of wanted to make this like Stone Roses meets Unwed Sailor.
Love that.
Kind of danceable, reflective, melodic. So I feel like, you know, it seems like Unwed Sailor records these days, it's kind of like all the songs are like little stories inside the record, or little worlds. There hasn't been a real like, oh, this whole record is like one big story or one big. It's kind of like these like little worlds inside an album that you can
really cool.
Visit and go to.
I love that. I love that they all, like you said, all these influences, they all do have that, not so much sound, but that homage, if you will, you know, to these artists that you love, like you said, the Sundays or, you know, the Stone Roses. It's cool that you can take these songs and they're yours and they sound like Unwed Sailor, but you can tell, you know, where your heart was or at one point in your life. You know, I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's the influences are there and they're strong, but they make subtle appearances. Yeah. Like, and that's what we just did this tour with the Chills, the band from New Zealand. Amazing band, who we're all big fans of, and it was such an honor to go on tour with them. But their crowd is an older crowd who, you know, grew up in the 80s on the Chills and other bands like that. and they grew up on the Sundays in New Order. And so they would all these Chills fans would come back to the merch table and they'd be like, oh my gosh, like I was listening to you guys and it's like I felt what I felt like when I heard the Sundays or when I heard the Catherine Wheel or New Order. And it was such a huge compliment to me.
Absolutely.
When people would say that to me, because I ended up talking to him for 45 minutes at the merch table about these bands, you know.
That's so cool.
And that meant a lot. And I feel like people hear Unwed Sailor and these subconscious, these memories come back to them of these bands that they love so much without throwing it in their face.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
No, I totally.
It's like not like, oh, we're trying to sound like the Sundays or whatever. It's like, it's just naturally there in these subtle ways. And then people are picking up on that and feeling those feelings again, which is so great.
That's what a cool moment that must feel like, you know, when somebody does say something like that. That's really,
it's amazing.
Very, very cool. Let me ask you this. I know this is probably hard because everyone always, you know, equates songs to being their babies. But what's if you had to pick one song in your whole career, what's the song?
Oh, dude. Wow. Well, I would have to. Let's narrow it down to a song that I wrote.
Sure.
Or helped write.
Sure.
Well, I'd probably have to pick the two most probably influential ones, or ones that I'm probably known for the best. Can I pick two?
Sure, absolutely, man.
All right, I'd have to say Sperm Ridden Burden, obviously. Sure. That, because that's a song that I found a deep part of myself that I didn't know that was there.
Yeah.
And I was able to express it. And I remember any time I ever played Sperm Ridden Burden, if I went up and I felt like shit before that song, afterwards I felt great.
I bet.
Because I got out every
everything,
single bad thing in me. Probably stuff that was in me back from childhood I didn't even know about came out in that song. Well, actually, yes. Childhood things did come out in those lyrics. But so that's probably one of the most meaningful songs for me, because it's so personal and it just has been therapy for me over the years.
Absolutely.
Being able to perform it. And probably the second one would be Ruby's Wishes. I feel like that bass line and that drum part just came together so beautifully. It was one of the first Unwed Sailor songs I'd ever written. And there's just an innocence about it. Yeah. That I really treasure. And a peacefulness about it. And, you know, Dave Bazan wrote that drum beat. Wow. And I remember we recorded the Firecracker EP, our first release, in the same house that It's Hard to Find a Friend was recorded, on the same gear and everything. Wow. And I remember playing that bass line and looking at Dave in the corner on his drum kit, writing that drum beat, and hearing it and seeing him play it and just thinking, oh my God, like, this is perfect. Like, yeah, that's awesome. And just having that experience. And I think Ruby's Wishes too is a lot of people's favorite Unwed Sailor song. It seems like one that when people hear that drum beat kick in live, they get super stoked. So, you know, out of all of them, I'd say those are probably two of the most important ones to me. That's really cool. Well, those are both fantastic songs, and I see why you pick them both. And I mean, that makes total sense. Sweet. So what's next up for Unwed? I know you said you're writing a new record, but you got any tour plans? I know I just saw you posted you're doing somewhat Arkansas and Oklahoma dates, and any other tours coming up? Yep. In May, after that, we're doing a Midwest and East Coast tour. Oh, nice. And then we're also going to hit, this year we'll hit the West Coast, and we're also come down your way. Oh, nice. Where at? Come down south. Well, I don't know yet. I'm not sure when, but we every year we'll be down there. So
well, let me know if I can help. I know I did a show for you down there before. So
yeah, of course. You know, the Florida South area is like one of our favorite places to tour. So
it's awesome.
I always love coming down there.
Yeah, it's cool to hang. Cool hang time.
So yeah, doing that, and then again, I'm writing a new record right now. So, which is almost bass and drums and percussion and keys are almost all done.
Wow.
So we're almost ready for guitars, and then we'll go mix it. So
dude,
yeah,
you're just crushing
that's all
it
I'm
out.
Thinking about right now. So that record.
Do you have a name for that record?
I do, but I can't tell you.
Okay, well then that's fine.
You'll have to wait. You'll have to wait till 2024.
Oh, fair enough. I can do that. That's exciting though, man. I'm really happy for you. It's just really awesome. You know, like I said earlier, knowing you, but it's just cool to hear these stories and these opportunities you've been given, and I'm so stoked for you. I think it's so cool, and I admire you, you know, like as a musician, and I'm really stoked that you get to still do what you love to do. I think that's super cool.
Man, thank you. And I am too, dude. I'll be 50 next year. And I've been doing this for well over half my life. And I'm just like, dude, like, how did I luck out, like, and find exactly what I love to do and what I feel like I was meant to do?
That's so cool.
Like, I found it, and I've been able to do it over all these years. And I feel so fortunate and so lucky, especially as I get older.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, man, I'm 50 and I'm still doing this. Like, and I'm, you know, more happy than I've ever been doing it.
Yeah.
And being able to put out records every year and write all these songs, like it's, yeah, dude, I'm so thankful and honored that I get to like live this life and do it.
That's so cool. Johnathon, I really appreciate your time, man. It's been long overdue. I know we got to hang at Furnace, but hopefully we get to hang again soon. And, you know, I really appreciate you coming on and hanging out and telling me some cool stories.
Yeah, dude. Thanks for having me. Anytime, man.
Awesome, dude. Cool. Well, till we meet again.
All right. Hopefully
all right, brother.
Soon.
Yes. Awesome, man. Hit me up.
All right. Take care.
All right, buddy.
Bye.
Thank you again for tuning in to this latest episode. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Johnathon Ford and I. An amazing guy, super talented, and an incredible storyteller as well. So thank you so much for tuning in. Really looking forward to what we have coming up soon. So thank you, and tell your friends.